Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for today's Savant live webinar. Today, we're discussing how to navigate your finances when life gets messy. My name is Libby Muldowney, and joining me is fellow financial advisor, Steve Lorence. Again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Libby, and glad to be here.
We'll start off with an agenda of a couple topics that we're going to cover today. Life can get messy in many ways. There are a couple things that can happen that are going to be the most disruptive to your finances and your goals. A divorce, a layoff or job loss, losing a spouse. These are all highly disruptive, not only to your lifestyle, but in your finances. And that's what we want to talk about today, is how to address the financial side of these disruptive events. And then finally, we'll wrap up with giving you some tools to prepare for them in advance. So if you have time to set aside to address this before a disaster strikes, we'll give you the resources to start out and look at that. But Steve, why don't you kick off today's topics and get us started?
Awesome. Thank you, Libby. And as Libby said, these are just a few things that may go wrong in life. And some of these are common. Divorce, you think about no one when they are on the cusp of getting married. I don't think anyone's planning on a divorce. But we do know divorces have become more and more common. As we discuss all of these things, we'll be talking about some of the financial considerations, but we want to keep in mind too that all of these are very emotional as well. At the forefront of the financial considerations and the emotional side of things, it's going to be about getting you to a place that despite all of the emotional things that are going on, how do I make good decisions in the face of that? So talking about divorce first and foremost. When it comes to a divorce, one of the first challenges is going to be facing what is this new reality. When it comes to a financial standpoint, you're going to be looking at things, how does this affect my retirement plans? We were planning as a couple to be able to retire at this point based on this level of income. How does this change affect that new reality for me? What does my new budget look like? Budget's going to affect all of these other things. Based on your income alone, based on the other source of income that are coming in, are you going to be able to manage the same lifestyle? Or is the new budget going to have to change significantly? How does this affect my savings rate? This is both a short-term and a long-term question, but that's going to come into play as well. And then again, does my lifestyle need to change in order for me to still be able to accomplish the goals I had previously? Or do I just have new goals that could still accommodate my lifestyle today? First thing you're going to do is really assess your situation. You want to get organized. So based on your new reality of being divorced, you're going to build that new budget. What does it look like? Identify what income sources do you have? If you're employed, what does that employment income look like? Do you need to look for employment? Are you getting maintenance payments from your former spouse? Are you getting child support? What does that look like and how does your budget fit around that? You're going to want to really get a handle on your insurance situation. If you were on your former spouse's health insurance through their employer, that's going to be a change for you. Do you have life insurance on yourself? Now that you may be single mom or dad, now that you may be the primary caregiver for your children, do you have enough life insurance to cover the expenses that are associated with that in the event of a divorce? You want to identify current and retirement savings. So current as in short-term savings. What resources do I have available today to maintain some flexibility while I kind of get a handle on my new reality? And what retirement savings do I have? In the divorce settlement, did I get more retirement savings and less savings of our current savings? Or do I have more current savings and less retirement savings? Depending on what side of that you're on, you may have to make different decisions. And determine what you want your future to look like. Now that you're a single person, now that you have a different reality, do you want the same things for the future? Does this shape how you're making decisions? Do you still want to retire at the same time? Do you still want to retire to the same place? And then you're probably going to want to locate your estate documents. Oftentimes when you're married, your spouse at that time is going to be your agent on powers of attorney, things like that. They're typically going to be your co-trustee if you have a trust. So those are things that you want to update. Beneficiaries want to make sure that you're looking at those and assessing your situation. One big example of an area where there's probably going to be decision making is going to be the family home. There could be an opportunity for one spouse to buy out the other. Oftentimes what you'll see is one spouse will get the house in a divorce settlement and the other spouse will get more liquid assets. So in that position, what are you going to do with it? There's exemptions that come into play as far as the capital gains on a property. Really some questions to ask yourself. Can you really afford to keep this non-income producing asset if you only have one income now? What assets will give up to keep the home? Is it worth it, right? Do you have to sell a lot of other assets in order to maintain the house that you're in today? And then there's the emotional considerations, right? Do you want a fresh start? Do you want to start building new memories away from that home?
Yeah, the family home is one of the biggest decisions in that most of the time in people's net worths, your home is one of your largest assets. So from a financial perspective, it is a huge asset that needs to be negotiated, but it's also your home. It's your shelter. If you have children, it's where you maybe brought them home from the hospital or raised them. So it's a huge emotional decision as well. The good news is you typically have some time before you have to make that decision as you work through the process. So don't feel the pressure to make a decision right away, and absolutely don't make it in a rush, because you have to navigate both sides of this, the financial and the emotional. But you do want to keep a long-term plan in mind. You're hurting now and you're emotional now, but long-term, can you afford the house? So you really need to think on both sides of that coin, but a long-term perspective is really going to be what you should lean towards when you're making this decision.
Once you kind of decide where you're at today or get a handle on what you have, you really need to start building a plan, right? So based on the budget that you put together, based on your new reality, determine whether you could still meet your savings goals both long and short term. If you can't, what can you do in order to meet those goals? Do you have to retool, go back to school, get more education? Do you have skills that you could rotate into a new job, higher paying job potentially, maybe a new industry? Those are some of the things you want to think about for sure. But you want to create priorities, certainly depending on what side of that coin, as far as getting more cash savings versus retirement savings, or getting the home versus getting more assets. You may want to start looking at building an emergency fund if you don't have one today. And that's going to need to be based on your new situation. You're going to be in a one income household, right? So that's going to be a big consideration as far as how much of an emergency fund do I have? Did me and my spouse have young children? Am I picking up the mortgage? What does that look like, right? So that's going to be a big priority there. If you need to increase your income in order to fill in the gaps, that's going to be a big priority as well. Fill in the gaps in benefits, as I mentioned previously: health insurance, life insurance, disability insurance. And then you're going to want to, again, update those estate documents and beneficiaries. Beneficiaries are going to be in your retirement accounts, whether you have estate documents or not. Versus if you have estate documents the attorney drafted for you, you're going to want to go visit with them to review those. That leads us to assembling the right team of professionals. Again, most of us hopefully haven't gone through a divorce before, so this is probably new to you. So there's a lot of questions that you may or may not know that you need to be asking yourself. A financial advisor, they're going to be able to answer the questions of, do I have enough assets? What do my savings rates need to be? What should my overall risk be in my portfolio? They're going to be able to answer those for you, be able to run projections. Certainly, you're probably going to want to find an experienced divorce attorney prior to engaging into the divorce, right? To make sure that you're getting a good deal, a good fair deal on the divorce. You're probably going to want to find a CPA. You may or may not be the spouse that filed the taxes. You're probably going to want to speak to somebody how a divorce is going to impact your income tax situation. Other professionals you may want to consider engaging with are going to be realtors. Certainly when it comes to the family home, that's going to be a big consideration. Can I afford to move? What does the market look like? Based on interest rates today, does it make sense for me to sell this property and lock in at a higher interest rate? And then assurance agent and estate attorney as well should be part of this team, at the very minimum, to be able to have as a resource to ask questions when you run into something that you don't have experience with. That was divorce. Now we're going to turn it over to Libby for layoffs or job loss.
An absolutely disruptive event Or maybe not. Maybe you plan to leave your job to restart. It's a career change, maybe a fresh start, or it's something you planned for, or maybe it's something that's happened very suddenly and it wasn't your choice. In all cases, it's disruptive to lose your income. So what do we do now? Well, we've got some checklist items that we can address first. Certainly our heads are going to be spinning, our security and our safety is in question, which brings up a lot of fear. So we want to get you some empowering things to do to get your arms around this moment. And again, this is just going to be pen to paper. What are my finances? I want everything down in front of me in black and white. This might be something that you do as a household regularly, and you're very in touch with this. Maybe you have a monthly budget meeting or quarterly you review these things. So it's just pulling it out and now making updates. Or if you put it to the side and you don't have a formal draft of something like this, now's the time to put it all together. So where is all your money going? And what do you actually need? So a budget will be a good way to help eliminate unnecessary expenses that maybe you've had up to this point that you can eliminate. Now that cash flow is going to be thin, you want to make sure you're only spending money on the necessities. So itemizing those things, understanding what is necessary and what is not at this time is a good exercise to go through, again, to help empower you and feel like you have some sense of control over where your money is going at this point. Don't delay on filling out applications and paperwork for employment benefits. That takes time for those things to get in place. It takes even more time for distributions to start. Oftentimes there is a lag before it'll even kick in. So as soon as you get your hands on that paperwork so that you are not the cause for any further delay, complete that and submit it as soon as possible. Maybe you have a hobby, maybe you have something on the side that you've always wanted to do. COVID opened up a lot of online work from home type of side hustle opportunities. It's not meant to replace your previous income, but if something like that can help cover a bill, maybe it's just your groceries for the month, and it also helps keep you engaged, or it gives you the opportunity to try something new and dabble in to see if that's the direction you want to head. Go ahead and take this opportunity to jump in with both feet on something like that. Oftentimes with our debt payments, if you're being aggressive, you might be doubling down on those payments. Maybe you're making payments bi-weekly instead of monthly. Perhaps you have a type of debt where interest only payments are an option, but you've always been making principal payments on top of that. Well, now's a good time to look at those options. You may want to consider only making interest only payments if that's an option on some debts. Maybe now's not the time to double down on aggressively paying down that debt because you want to preserve the cash flow that you have. So you'll want to take a look at what options you have so that you are meeting your debt obligations at the bare minimum without necessarily taking this as the time to be, hammering away at the balance of those things. Just make them a maintenance item at this point.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback on that as far as the budget and not just the debt payments, but really I think it's important for people when it's budgeting is even ahead of time being able to earmark what if in the event of a job loss, what items am I going to cut? I have 5 streaming services, I'm going to go down to 1. Some of those other expenses that you subscribe to something, you're paying $10, $15 a month, maybe it's even more. But look at those, and those are easy ones you can kind of mark off in the event of a job loss that you could go to.
Thanks, Steve. As I mentioned, you're going to start filling out paperwork for unemployment benefits. You don't know how long this period of time is going to last. Certainly, you're going to most likely be seeking a new job to replace that income, but you don't know if it's going to be long-term or short-term. So getting those unemployment benefits lined up, if you had it through your previous employer, maybe you need to apply federally, maybe through the state, they could have different tax treatments in different states. So you're going to want to make sure you have your arms around the net amount of that income so there's not any surprises or shortage of expectation. Health insurance is probably the biggest concern after just meeting your debt obligations that people have. Most health insurance is tied through our employers. So when that relationship is severed, you are on your own. You've lost your health insurance. COBRA gives you the opportunity to extend that plan for a period of time, although you'll be paying the employer's portion as well. So it's going to increase the payment that you have to make. So you'll want to shop around. There's a lot of online resources in the marketplace for private insurance, and COBRA may not be the best fit for you. So you'll want to do some homework so that you can fill that gap, as it's pretty critical and top of the list. The job landscape changes frequently. I'm going to say every 2 to 3 years. The skills that are needed and the type of value that you have, those are going to change every couple of years. Your resume may very well be outdated. If you haven't done it in a few years, now's the time to get that dusted off and updated. Work with your contacts of people in your industry. Maybe they're former coworkers, or maybe it's just other professional contacts that you had, and understand what skills people are looking for. That's something you're going to want to include on your resume that maybe you didn't have listed before, but now it's something that's very specific and important for employers that you'll want to include on that resume. While you're reaching out to these professional contacts, have them write a reference letter. So that way you have that in your back pocket and you're ready to jump on an opportunity whenever the opportunity presents itself, and you have all the pieces in line that you're going to need. Another thing to consider is there is a silver lining. If you have a low income year, there are some transactions that are going to be opportunistic in a year of low income. So for example, capital gains. If you have a portfolio that has large embedded gains that you haven't sold out of that investment because it'll trigger a capital gain, which will then be taxed at your tax rates. Well, capital gain tax rates are hinged on your income tax. So if your income is lower, it's possible that you could trigger that capital gain and avoid paying tax on it altogether. Transactions such as that, and maybe Roth conversions in certain scenarios, those are transactions that in a low income year can be an opportunistic to go ahead and execute that you wouldn't otherwise be looking for that opportunity at this point in your financial plan. So certainly working with a tax advisor or an investment advisor is going to help understand which of those opportunities fit your circumstance.
When it comes to seeking a new job, something I always encourage people to do is come up with a timeline. How long can I afford to be unemployed, whether it be a voluntary or involuntary separation, right? That's going to be a big consideration. And within that, let's say you have 12 months of expenses saved up that you have available to use. You're probably going to want to set timelines as far as I want to have applied to X amount of jobs in the first 3 months. So maybe I want to have applied for X amount of jobs by the first 6 or 9 months, right? Just to set you up in a situation where sometimes if you're unemployed, you may lose some of that structure of having a job. So it is good to keep a timeline and set up some dates that you need to have hard deadlines for.
It never hurts to have accountability.
Exactly.
Some of us need it more than others, but at least it keeps you on path.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes, our life insurance is a benefit that is provided through our employer. You know, when you sign up, you're checking the boxes for health insurance, you check the box for employer provided life insurance, and then you think, well, that's taken care of. And you don't think about it again, and you go about your life and you think, yeah, I have all those boxes checked. I have healthcare, I have life insurance. But again, that's through your employer. And if that's the only policy you have, when that employment terminates, you no longer have access to that group plan and you may no longer have life insurance. One step you can take is to reach out to that life insurance provider to inquire if that plan can then migrate to a personal or individual plan off of that group platform. If not, now's a good time to start looking around for private life insurance. This is something that would be something you want to have in place. And if you didn't have it in place before, now is an underlying kind of highlighting reason why you need to have private insurance, and you can't just rely on the life insurance through your employer, because you want to carry this through your life or as it's needed. And you don't want to lose it just because you've lost your employer.
And while health insurance is probably what gets the most attention when transitioning jobs, whether it be voluntary or involuntary again. But really, I think where we see some of the biggest gaps for people who are in between jobs is this life or disability insurance. The reason being is just because you're not working doesn't mean you cannot become disabled, right? So it may be even more important while you're not working. Maybe you're out doing more stuff. Maybe the reason why you took time off from your job is to be more active and go do things, which may increase your opportunity to become disabled. Life insurance, if you have young children, if you have a mortgage, This is an area where we see a lot of risk if you don't have that properly covered outside of your employer. So really important to sit down and assess where you're at today. And it would be good for you to assess with a professional if you do have enough to cover what you need to be covered in order to feel secure.
Thank you, Steve. Another big consideration, a lot of our retirement investments are tied to our employer through our 401ks. So you've been making contributions through your payroll deductions, your employer has been matching it. It's been on an auto invest, it's all autopilot, so you don't do anything, you don't think about it. Now all of a sudden you realize the picture has changed. You have this 401k, but you're no longer associated with that employer. What do I do with this asset? Am I still able to make contributions? Am I able to take the employer contributions with me? All these things are going to be very specific and dependent. So you'll have a million questions. This is just some high level information that you'll want to consider whether or not you may want to keep it in a 401k or in an IRA. There are differences between the two vehicles, although they're both appropriate for retirement savings. In some cases, your employer may force you out. If you're no longer employed, they may not keep you on their 401k platform. However, you may be able to keep it there. And again, IRAs and 401ks have different rules, different distribution rules, etc. So understanding the differences between those two will help make the decision about whether or not you want to keep it in a 401k or roll it over into a self-directed IRA. Now, when you decide what you're going to do, if you're going to roll it over into an IRA, you're going to get a big stack of paperwork with about 10 check boxes and things to consider, and they don't necessarily all apply in your circumstance. So you do want to carefully review that with a professional and make sure you know which circumstance applies to you, so that if this is going to be a non-taxable rollover and you're just taking it from one retirement plan to another, that you're able to do that without any tax impact. If it's in an IRA, you may now have the opportunity to invest in a whole new world of investment options that weren't available to you in your 401k plan. 401k plans might have had a menu of options, maybe models that you got to choose from, and it was limited. But when it's self-directed, you really have the whole world at your fingertips as far as investment options. So you might be able to broaden your horizons and your investments by taking it self-directed rather than leaving it in a 401k. But again, not all the rules and circumstances, even though there are differences, they might not apply to you or matter in your situation. So while you'll go online and you'll Google, maybe you'll see something about a 401k and it says, well, that's a really good benefit. I think that's important, but yet it might not apply in your situation. So that's where you need to work with somebody to kind of put all those pieces together to decide what you're going to do with this big retirement asset that you have.
Now, I'd say this is a really important one for the reason being, if done correctly, this is a non-taxable event. As Libby said, there's a lot of different options. And if you're in a hurry or you're not being forced out, or you are being forced out, you may accidentally check the wrong box. And that one wrong box could create your whole 401k and have it become a taxable event for you. So if you had $250,000, $500,000 in your 401k plan with your employer, and you check the wrong box, you may be on the hook for a very large tax bill. So it is a really important thing to make sure that you're doing what you intend to do and making sure that you fully understand the tax impact of that box that you check. Well, thank you, Libby, for covering the loss of a job. This one here is, I'd say out of the three, I would probably paint as probably the most emotional thing. It's something that if you are married, or if you've been married for a long time, none of us leave here alive, right? So it's something that is going to happen. If you're married, in all likelihood, you will lose a spouse. One of you will go first. It's not often that we go at the same time. And with that, this is a very emotional time frame. I want to emphasize that there's a lot of really important things that you need to do. But kind of at the beginning, one of the best piece of advice that I could give is that most things are not urgent. There's a lot of important things, but not everything needs to be urgent. So it's important to sit down, take a deep breath, and make sure that you're making, again, good decisions in an emotional time of your life. Again, here, take your time. Consider a timeline just with that job loss situation. Consider a timeline as far as when do things need to be done. As I said, a lot of things are important. Not a lot of them are urgent. you have joint bank accounts, you should still have access to those. If you have proper titling on beneficiary, a lot of that professionals will reach out to you and tell you what you need to do. And although, so you want to make big decisions under a situation that you're not emotional, right? So some of those may be downsizing. If you are in a big house with your spouse, now that they're no longer there, it may be a situation where you want to move to somewhere smaller. Relocating is very common. Oftentimes your adult children have moved away. You lose a spouse and you guys loved living where you're at, but now it makes it a little bit more compelling to get closer to your children and grandchildren. Certainly selling a business or property, you want to take your time with that and you want to engage with the right people who can give you good advice.
And there are resources for that timeline. We have checklists of items that are within a 3-month window of somebody passing, within a 6-month window, within the 12-month window, and so forth. So yes, there's going to be a list of, 100 things that you're going to need to take care of. And that can overwhelm you if you look at that list. But if you realize that you don't have to do them all at once and you can do them in bite-sized pieces, that helps make it more manageable.
So again, the common theme here, right? We're repeating some of the same things here, but it is really important to assess where you currently are. So based on that new reality, like with the divorce, in this situation, losing a spouse, you're going to want to assess where you're at today. You want to determine what income and assets you have available to you to pay your bills, what's going to be coming in on a monthly basis. Related to that, you're going to want to assess your liabilities and debts. How much money do I have going out on fixed debt payments? You want to evaluate your insurance policies and benefits again. Did your spouse have life insurance on their life that you're entitled to? If not, if there was no life insurance, do you still have long-term care insurance? Is that something now that there's only one of you that you need? You were planning on taking care of each other. So do you need a long-term care policy now? Again, you really want to review those beneficiaries in the state documents. With the loss of a spouse, usually it was reciprocal where you were each other's primary beneficiaries. Now you may need to elevate contingent beneficiaries. So those are all things you want to take a look at. Your role as an investor. Oftentimes in a husband and wife or a spousal relationship, there's going to be one who is the personal CFO, or they're going to have the investment cap on. Oftentimes the other person is looking for one answer. Do we have enough money to accomplish our goals, right? So if you were that person who said, I just want to know if we have enough, you're going to have to take on a more active role. You're going to be responsible for determining how much portfolio distributions you're going to need to supplement the loss of income. There's going to be planning considerations that change from covering 2 life expectancies to only 1. And these changes are going to require an evaluation of 1, your risk tolerance, but also your financial plan. So with risk tolerance, oftentimes spouses don't necessarily agree on how much risk they should be taking with their investments. It's not uncommon for us to see one spouse wants to be really aggressive and the other spouse wants to be pretty conservative. And oftentimes they'll meet in the middle when they're married or when they're both here. If it's only one spouse, chances are you're going to need to change that overall allocation, overall risk profile of your investments. And then with financial planning, certainly there's a big change in between going for a household with a 2-person household and what those expenses look like versus what a one-person household looks like. Oftentimes your expenses aren't going to be cut by 50% just because there's only one. Oftentimes you're cutting off 20% maybe. And does your income get adjusted by more than that? And if so, you may need to look at filling some gaps. A good example of this is going to be Social Security. So here's an example. You have spouse 1 with Social Security of $30,000, spouse 2 Social Security of $20,000 for a total household Social Security of $50,000. When the first spouse passes, that household income is going to drop by $20,000 a year. So now as CFO of your personal finances, it's going to be a little bit up to you to decide or determine how are we going to handle this? Is it going to affect my ability to be financially independent? Am I going to have to change my lifestyle from a day to day? Am I going to have to cut back on how often I go out to eat? Am I going to have to cut back on vacations? What does that look like? And then do you have to also combine the loss of Social Security with loss of a pension? It's not as common today, but we did see a generation that had lots of pensions. Oftentimes employers had employer-sponsored pensions. You have public pensions if you were a police officer, a firefighter. And oftentimes the spouse isn't going to be getting 100% spousal benefit. Oftentimes it's a 50% benefit. Oftentimes it's a 75% benefit. So in between a reduction of Social Security benefits, a reduction of pension, do you have the ability to cover that gap? Or do you need to make lifestyle changes? All this has to do with really, if you were that silent partner or that non-CFO partner, it all has to do with regaining your sense of security. We all grieve differently. It's going to take some of us longer than others. And for some of us, we're grieving and we want to get a lot done. Others, it's really hard to handle and we don't want to do as much. So how are you going to regain that sense of security? You know, one good way to do that is offloading a lot of your stress. I joke with people that we stress so you don't have to, but really when you're hiring professionals, think of financial advisors, CPA, estate attorney, what you're doing is offloading a lot of the responsibility of knowing what questions to ask yourself and offloading it on somebody who does this on a day in and day out basis, and it helps a lot of individuals get through these type of situations. So it is really important at very minimum to meet with these types of people so you can get your questions answered. And again, it helps relieve some of the emotional stress of making these big decisions, knowing that you have somebody who's going to give you the questions that you need to be asking. And they're going to help coach you as far as what levers am I going to need to pull in order to maintain my lifestyle. So, you know, to us, gaining a sense of security is really gaining the confidence that you have the right people around you and you have the right knowledge in order to make good decisions going forward. Really managing immediate expenses, again, that's going to be a huge one. Some of this is going to have to do with pre-planning. It's why, you know, that emergency fund is going to be huge. That's why life insurance may come to play. But this is really going to be the first hurdle you have to hit. Hopefully you guys have planned ahead and you have the ability to cover this. Otherwise, you may have to make some choices or look at what options you have available to you to cover these types of things. You're going to want to really look at your benefits and taxes. This is, again, going to be one of the bigger shifts in losing a spouse. Do you have survivor benefits on any pensions there were? Social Security, what does that look like for you? How much of a benefit are you going to lose? Social Security is going to be less with one person than it was for the two of you. So you need to determine how you're going to handle that. What does investment income look like? How am I getting distributions? What do my distributions look like? What distributions are sustainable for my portfolio? And then taxes are going to be a huge consideration. As Libby mentioned previously, there are potentially some opportunities, but a lot of people don't think about is that while you're married filing jointly, you almost have double the tax bracket. So if you are going to be in a position where this year you're filing married jointly, next year you're filing as an individual, there may be some opportunities again for those capital gains, for those Roth conversions. So there are opportunities even in the face of something like this. Adjusting to losing the loss of income. Once you kind of gathered where you're at, what sources of income you have, what expenses are going to be going out, you really want to take a look at it. If your income sources are enough, that's awesome. But if they're not, what options do you have? Maybe consider getting a new employment opportunity. Not only can employment fill the gap in your finances, we often see situations where after losing a spouse, the other spouse goes back to work because it's a good opportunity to get back out, mingle with people. It really becomes part of the social life. Especially if you're in a situation where you can choose what type of job you're taking, right? If it's not a need, it's a want, it can potentially help you. And it will only help from a financial standpoint. You want to review and adjust your household budget. Again, this takes time. It's not something that you're going to decide, hey, here's my new budget 3 months after your spouse has passed away. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some adjusting to. It may take 6, 12, 18, 24 months in order to get used to that new budget. It may take even longer if you're going through things like downsizing, selling a second home, selling a business. Things like that are all going to affect that. And it will take time to adjust. So don't feel like you need to have an answer a week after your spouse has passed away. This is something that's going to take some time to get used to. And then consider the impact on your retirement planning. If you're already retired, then as we mentioned, it's going to be deciding whether your assets are able to fill the gap that you're losing in income. If you're not retired, how am I going to fill up the gap of only having maybe one income to save for retirement? Maybe we still have to put kids through college. Things like that are all going to impact that retirement plan. Again, updating estate plan documents through all of these, it is important, in particular divorce, but again, loss of a loved one is going to be, this is going to be one of the major things you want to do. You're going to want to review and update beneficiary designations and account ownership. Did you have accounts titled jointly? Who did you have as beneficiary? As I mentioned previously, oftentimes the spouse is going to be the primary beneficiary on each other's accounts. And then you'll have kids, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters, and those will in all likelihood move up then to that primary. So you're going to want to make sure you're looking at that. Maybe even more importantly is taking a look at your wills, trust, and powers of attorney, for instance. Oftentimes you have your spouse as each other's agent. So if something were to happen to you, you would be the power of attorney for your spouse. Now that they're not here, who is going to fill that role? There's certain things like financial power of attorney or healthcare power of attorney where it's going to be beneficial to have somebody close, right? You may have kids that are spread out over the country. It may make sense to maybe not necessarily choose the one who's got the most experience in finances, but pick the one who's going to be able to help you along the way. So that's a huge consideration and something that you're going to need to take a look at. Again, you've heard us say it before, but really it helps seeking professional advice. Financial planners, attorneys, tax professionals, they're all going to be able to help you answer these questions and hopefully in a way that takes some of the stress off of your plate. In any time like this where you're going through a really emotional event like losing a loved one, you're going to want to remove the emotions the best you can to make sure that you're making good long-term financial decisions. So seek professional advice to the extent that you need to, but through any emotional time, it does help offload some of that and push some of it onto somebody else so you don't feel like you have to do it all.
Yeah. And furthermore, Steve, hopefully if you're experiencing one of these disruptive events, it's not something you have experience with. You haven't had to go through it before. It's all new to you. That's what I hope for each and every one of you who may experience something like this throughout your lives. But as financial advisors or as your tax advisor, we see many, many people and many, many different lives in many different scenarios. So we are able to identify the strategies or the opportunities or the problem solving techniques because we have had experience with these situations before, and we've had experience in a broad range of circumstances as well. So it is very important to recognize that there are really smart things and helpful things that can be employed at a time like this. And of course, you won't have experience with it, so you're not expected to know those things. So don't be afraid to lean on professionals.
And this makes the next part a little bit easier. If you do engage in professionals to help you, it allows you to focus on your personal well-being. Through this, as I mentioned, there are financial considerations. You want to make sure that you're covering your bases and putting yourself in a good position so that you could continue to live the life you want on a go-forward basis. But really, it's about getting yourself into a position and prioritizing self-care and stress management. You need to go seek emotional support and be able to attend to the needs of dependents and loved ones. Just because we lose a loved one, our lives and the other people in our lives that we love and care about don't stop. And it is really important to remember that we all play a role in our family units. And it may be our job, so to speak, to help care for those younger children in that situation, or maybe grandchildren, whatever it may be, in order to help them along with the grieving process.
Thank you, Steve. We've got through some heavy material, and we're going to start to get to the last item on our agenda today. But before I do that, I want to again point out we're approaching the end of our prepared material. And thank you to everyone who has sent in some questions while we've been going through this. But if you haven't submitted a question yet, you've got the opportunity to start putting that in the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen. But at this point, I'm going to start talking about a way to be proactive. Thus far, we have kind of discussed how to be reactive to an event such as we've discussed, but there is the opportunity for you to plan ahead and be somewhat prepared for the unexpected. No, you don't have to know what the future holds, and no, you don't have to have a crystal ball, but you've seen some similarities, you've probably heard some overlaps, and there's certain things that are going to need to be addressed no matter what the cause. So for example, loss of income can be caused by a death. Loss of income can be caused by divorce. It can certainly be caused by a job loss. In all scenarios, you have to replace income. Estate planning documents have needed to be updated. There's been some recurring themes. So even though we can't predict the event that's going to disrupt our lives, we know there's certain impacts that are going to manifest. So we do want to talk about ways to prepare for that. And I have a checklist of some things we can review so that you can plan ahead. Well, the first thing certainly is having a plan, having a path, having a long-term goal in mind of how you want things to end up. Know that you're going to go off of plan. That is inevitable. Life throws curveballs at all of us. That's okay. Making sure that going off plan is a part of your plan will give you comfort and peace of mind, knowing that you're going to deviate. When you deviate, you have a plan to get you through that period of time until you can get back on path. Then once you're on path, you can resume your ultimate path to your long-term goals and projections. So creating a budget so that you know what you have, what you need, what your expenses are. I mentioned, a couple times we've said, gather that information. That's why it's a good idea to do this periodically. Maybe a monthly check-in, maybe a quarterly check-in, so you're aware of these things. So that way, when an event is disruptive, you already have your arms around that stuff. And again, you're one step ahead because you already have all the information at your fingertips. So you're not kind of swirling around in a panic. Having an emergency fund. Yes, it's been addressed in every topic, and there's a reason for that. It's critical. It's probably the first thing you will see if you go on and Google, financial planning. Having an emergency fund is going to be fundamental in almost every item that comes up. And the reason for that is if you build a plan and you don't have that backup, when things go off track, now the whole plan is off track. But if you have an emergency fund, now you just address the emergency fund as a part of your plan so that everything else stays on path. I'm glad we give this advice, and I'm glad I follow my own advice. Several years ago, my family had a very disruptive medical event, and I had to take a leave from work. Having the emergency fund was one of the only ways I was able to get through that period of time so that I could be present and help my loved one until I could go back to work and then resume my income. But the emergency fund allowed me the freedom to be able to provide the care for my family member. So it may not be you that has the impact, but it could be someone you love. An emergency fund just gives you the freedom to be able to help that individual out. We talked about, the estate planning. Just so happened that it was my daughter who had the medical event. She was over age 18, but being in the field I'm in, I had power of attorney on her. I know a lot of people don't have power of attorney on their 18-year-old children, but I work with lawyers. I work with this every day. So as soon as she turned 18, I became her power of attorney because the mom power goes away when your children become adults. Well, that became critical in managing things that needed to be managed on top of just making sure that healthcare decisions were made for her. So these are not just good ideas. I've lived through them being actually critical in helping to solve problems that never could have been predicted. If you have the opportunity to diversify your income sources, if you've never thought about it, that is becoming a common theme. Certainly you're going to have your wage, your 9 to 5, your career, but you can also build kind of backup plans. They might not replace or match your income, but maybe you can have passive income or side gigs, things like that that are going to provide additional income that while you're working can go towards the future or for savings. But if you lose your job or you have a loss of income, now that can go to meeting your immediate expenses. So consider looking for opportunities to diversify income and not just relying on your wage. And save for the short term. If you Google financial planning, not having enough saved for retirement is probably going to be number one on the list. It is a crisis in the American, population that nobody has enough saved for retirement. And so it is of utmost importance that you build a retirement plan. But retirement and the future is not the only thing that you need to plan for. You may need to plan for more immediate needs, short-term goals, because retirement plans are going to have a lot of rules around them and restrictions and possible penalties if you try to access them prior to retirement. So having money set aside that is not just for retirement is also going to want to be a part of your strategy. So having buckets of savings to match different goals is going to be something that'll help you get through challenging periods of time. And having the right insurance ahead of time. We know it's too late, right? Once an event happens, you can't get the insurance. And again, you can't predict the future, so you don't know what's going to happen. So you might end up with several different types of policies, different plans. And maybe while you were working, one plan was the right fit, but if you're not working, maybe that's not the right plan. Or if you were married, you had an insurance policy that made a great deal of sense. But if you're no longer married, that insurance policy perhaps does not apply in this circumstance. So you want to make sure you're reviewing those things as your circumstances change. So again, if the unfortunate happens, you have that backup plan in place. And that's exactly what we want. So looking at your current situation, looking at your long-term goal, looking at the big picture and building a plan is absolutely ideal, but having things to help navigate challenging circumstances in place, like insurance, emergency funds, and having your arms around your budget and your finances ahead of time so that when these inevitable disruptions happen, you don't have to scrap your big picture. You don't have to scrap the long-term goals because you have these sidebar backup plans to help get through the challenges to keep you on your path.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to put together a plan and stress test it as your life changes, as you have children, as you get older, as you get closer to retirement. So when these unexpected things in life do happen and life does get messy, you're able to handle it.
That ends our prepared material, but again, we have the Q&A box open. And again, thanks to those of you who submitted some questions so far. If not, now's a good time to start typing those in. But I have a question, Steve, and let me know your thoughts on this. How do I know if I need a trust?
How do you know if you need a trust? So it's going to be unique to each individual situation. Some common things that would indicate to me that a trust maybe would make sense from the estate planning side of things is if you just have a complex situation, if you have multiple properties, if you own a business, if you want to be giving money to multiple generations. Those are all things that would indicate that that may make sense for you, right? So it's going to be really unique to each individual situation. There's going to be financial cases. There's going to be control cases where you want to have control from the grave, so to speak, over where your assets go and how they're distributed. Sometimes you want to protect children and grandchildren from themselves. So it all really depends on your goals. Again, that's a situation where those professionals that we talked so much about, that would be a good opportunity to meet with somebody based on your unique situation and what you have going on in your life to see if that makes sense.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I do have a question here as far as what constitutes an emergency fund. Emergency fund, everyone's kind of got a different view of what they see as emergency fund. I see it as cash in your checking account above and beyond what your monthly expenses are. I think your savings account is certainly part of that. Any cash that you hold in brokerage accounts. So if you have a taxable brokerage account, cash that's within that you could see as an emergency fund. Some HSA, if you have an HSA or a health savings account, you have the opportunity to use that for healthcare expenses, can pay COBRA premiums. Things like that, that could be seen as another thing that you could add to your emergency fund because it can be used for certain things that you would need to pay for in the case that you had a job loss or something like that.
Another question that I have is, should I have a prenup agreement to prevent me from disruption? And, there's a lot of different scenarios, certainly. One thing that I look at is there's different stages when we get married and different stages when we get divorced. Oftentimes in a traditional setting, if you're young and you're getting married, when you both have nothing and come to the marriage with nothing and you're building your lives together, a prenup may not be important because you don't have a lot of individual resources that you're bringing to the marriage from a pre-marriage stage of life. If you're getting married later in life, or if it's a second marriage and you've already gone through this disruption and you've regrouped already and you've had to fight for those assets that you have, and it's a scary thought to think they could be subject to split again, that's going to be a scenario where looking at getting a prenuptial agreement will be of a little bit more importance to protect your assets. And unfortunately, it can be a touchy subject, but it is absolutely something that can be addressed and be planned for to protect you. And if your spouse wants a prenuptial agreement, just know that you have the ability to protect yourself and your assets as well. And it's not meant to, hurt anybody, but there can be a lot of good sense in having a prenuptial agreement.
Thank you, Libby. It looks like that is all the time we have for questions.
Well, thank you everyone for participating today. As a reminder, a survey will pop up in your web browser when this webinar ends. So if you have any specific questions that we didn't answer, be sure to put them in the survey under questions and comments, and we will gladly follow up with you. And if at any time you're looking for information about Savant and what we do, I invite you to go to savantwealth.com to learn more. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.